Hey guys, and welcome back to Rush Royale. And today we're going to be playing with the deck that I have been honestly probably enjoying the most recently, which is the Boreas. It's a Boreas Hex Thunderer deck. So it's getting damage from Boreas and Thunderer, and then Hex was already kind of a good support card for Boreas, but I found it just fits right. Everything seems to fit right in with Thunderer. Yeah, I'm using all three of those in a deck together here with Harlequin and Priestess. And of course, the Priestess is for mana generation. And, you know, with Harlequin, I can easily copy the Priestess to try and get more mana from that card. It's not quite as effective as with Mime, but honestly, I feel like Mime doesn't add that much to the combat effectiveness of the deck. It's really just more... That's not totally true because it can, you know, it can help merge things, but you're really counting on merging into something else. Whereas with this deck, I would say the only wasted card to merge into is probably Priestess, if it's a higher tiered one. Because even Harlequin, at some point, I can sometimes merge back out of a higher tier Harlequin, unless it's like tier 5, in which case I'm probably stuck with it. But pretty much anything lower than that, I might be able to still take advantage of in a match, so it's not totally wasted. The Priestess at like tier 4 might be wasted, but not always, mostly. But none of the other cards really are. Hex doesn't do any damage, but it does help me out tremendously with the later non-boss waves. It helps out tremendously and has caused me to win a number of those waves. Like, win on a number of those waves. Again, really non-boss waves because it has an insta-kill chance. So it helps to really reduce the number of mobs that are coming at me in some of those waves where the health is higher, and it kind of scales with that. And yeah, Hex scales very well with the endgame, and that's partly why I really like Hex. Whereas, like, Boreas just by itself doesn't scale as well, I feel like, with the endgame, especially Boreas versus Thunderer. But that's also why I like having Boreas and Thunderer in the same deck, because that way, you know, I've got several damage cards that can work really well, and if I end up with, you know, either one can work with Hex, it seems like. Boreas probably works a little better with Hex, but honestly, either one seems to work fine with Hex. And yeah, I've been really enjoying this deck. It's been my go-to deck, basically, recently. And I'm pushing trophies with it because it seems really, really good. But I just love how this deck... It starts out okay, but really where it shines is in the end game, and that's so important as you go up in trophies, it seems like, because a lot of the matches start going longer and longer, and you definitely need some sort of strategy that scales to end game, and Hex definitely scales well with end game from my experience. And that's one of the reasons I keep using it over and over, because it scales quite well. Its ability to get those instant... the insta-kill chance is quite good because really it pays off a lot as the sort of mobs have more and more health. They take more and more time to destroy from your units, and being able to instantly take one off the board, especially when it becomes more frequent, it can make a really big difference. It's really important, and it can really make a huge difference. And it's more powerful than just something that delays them, because if you delay them, you still have to destroy them at some point, unless your plan is to delay and win through that, which sometimes happens. But usually having some actual firepower to destroy stuff is good as well. And I feel like this deck brings that. It can struggle a little bit on boss rounds sometimes, but not if you have a really good setup. You just need to make sure that you have some damage-dealing units as well that are highly ranked up, but sometimes you can have a problem if you end up with a lot of high-tier hexes, but not as many high-tier damage cards. I mean, damage units. So there's um, definitely some skill with balancing how many hexes you want on the board versus how many other units you want on the board. So that's always a bit of a decision for me. But it is nice that there aren't too many things that... Really, the Priestess is the only card that I can brick with, I feel like, other than maybe a tier 5 Harlequin. Pretty much everything else, though, with a Harlequin, like, especially through tier 3, is still very usable, and it's not really wasted. So, only having really one wasted, card in the deck, I really like that. You know what I mean? I really like having the fact that the Priestess is the only thing that can't really be useful after I've merged it. So it definitely means that it's hard to brick this deck. It's hard to brick this deck. Sometimes I manage to brick it by, again, like I said, getting in a situation where I have more high-tier hexes than damage cards. And all my high-tier cards, units are hexes. And that can sometimes be a brick, but it's not necessarily... It's not like a complete brick. You know what I mean? Because the hex is still providing a bonus, and it can still work out, and you can be able to save it. It's not like other cards. It's not like getting a, tier 4 grindstone where it's like, if you have 2 tier 4 grindstones and like, I don't know. I feel like the hexes are still pretty good at what they do. As you can see, this is holding up quite well. And I have good spacing here on the hexes, so I'm getting a good amount of bonus there, and the other player disconnected, so nice. And yeah, it's very hard to brick with this deck even at the start. I don't typically... Well, at the start you can brick. I've bricked a few times with like Priestess and Hex, but it's rare because even Harlequin can usually do enough to last me, like a minute, like a little bit of time. So it's really just if I get like all hexes and like a Priestess or all hexes that I'm going to lose immediately. And that doesn't happen that often, so this is a reasonably safe deck at the start. Not the safest ever, but it's reasonably safe in comparison to some decks. So I'm liking it for that. And again, my favorite thing about it is really just the way that Hex scales in the endgame. It scales very nicely and gives you a particular edge in the endgame that you don't really need at the start. Sometimes at the start, I will combine hexes, especially in the first round. In particular, I will just combine all my hexes, usually because I don't really need their bonuses, and it's more important that I at least obtain one good DPS dealing unit, I feel like. Especially if I don't have one and I have a bunch of hexes, then I'll usually combine them because it's more important to have the DPS in the early rounds, and then important to add the hexes later on to help scale with the stronger sort of mob rounds in between the bosses, stronger waves in between the bosses, as well as the bosses too, but the hexes really just specifically help with the non-bosses, obviously. So yeah, taking down most of the bosses pretty easily. I'm still learning, like, all the strategies for the different bosses. I've got some of them down, and there's some that I feel like are specific to this deck. For example, with Bedlam, I kind of like it to let Bedlam go through a couple of swaps on me with this deck. What I do is I fill up all the tiles on the board, and then I let Bedlam kind of just swap them. And what I hope is to get the Priestess and Harlequin, and then I basically copy as many Priestesses as I can if I have any Harlequins, and I just combine all the Priestesses I get from each Bedlam swap, and that can net me a fair bit of mana each time. It can sometimes mess with my board, so there's a bit of a trade-off, but I found that's a pretty effective strategy at netting netting a lot of mana to sort of, basically gain a bonus from, Bedlam's effect, so that can be pretty good. I found that can be pretty good. And especially with later round Bedlams, it can be very helpful because then pretty much I'll have enough mana to level up whatever I got from the Bedlam or from the merging, even if it's not what I was expecting. So that tends to work pretty well. But obviously, if you didn't have Priestess, you might just try to go for as much DPS as possible to take down the Bedlam as quickly as possible. So I've also found that with Bedlam, sometimes I have to, especially with like later rounds, I have to copy with the Harlequin every single time that it gets swapped, because otherwise I end up with a bunch of Harlequins on the board and I'll end up losing the boss round because the Harlequins aren't doing enough damage. So I need to copy something for them every single time very quickly so that I can have units out there dealing damage to the Bedlam the entire time, right? So that's, there's a lot of stuff you have to pay attention to, but I do feel like this is on the lower end of the high maintenance decks. There's some decks where you really have to be engaged in maintaining a lot of stuff. This one is not quite one of those. I feel like there's a lot of options and avenues because I have two damage dealing cards, so Thunderer or Boreas or a combination, whichever, it's fine. And I'm not really gunning for any exact amount of hexes. I just try to make sure I have a good number of DPS cards too, units too. So I do feel like this is a little more flexible than, say, like an Inquisitor deck where you don't have much room for error. You really have to have the Inquisitors running at their optimal at all times, and you have to be very careful with maintaining that. With this deck, a little less careful because, well, and with a lot of the Thunderer decks in general, there's not that much maintenance, which I think is partly why they're so popular, because they're not as much work in a lot of ways as, other decks might be. For example, Engineer or Inquisitor, or there's definitely some others as well that require a lot of maintenance. But this one is not as much one of them. I kind of just put things out there and merge them one by one. And usually the arrangement is fine. Occasionally I'll try to, adjust the number of DPS cards versus hexes that are out there. But yeah, this deck is a little more chill than some of them. So I like grinding with this one because it's less intense on my brain. Yeah, so again, doing pretty well here with the Thunderer as well in this match. I do have my hexes kind of near the back. I know it's kind of like, well, I'd prefer to have them a little more spread up towards the middle. So I tried to start combining a few things, but I had such an advantage over my opponent already in this round. I was like, well, I think I can just wait with 20 seconds and we'll see what happens. So just not brick my setup in the meantime. And yeah, good game. Good game. So yeah, leave a like if you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you thought about this video in the comments and what other videos I should make. Subscribe if you're new to my channel. And thanks for watching, guys, and stay tuned for more videos.